TGIF, and thanks for joining me on today's Fridays with Flora. And today we're in the kitchen. We're taking a break from all our crafting outside, and we're going to be baking some chocolate chip cookies. And doing some AdWords search and keyword search, I was surprised to know that a lot of you out there are looking for tips and how-tos on chocolate chip cookies. And chocolate chip cookies is something I grew up enjoying and making with my mom. We used the Toll House recipe on the back of the bag. That's a really tried and true recipe. And today we're actually going to do the New York Times recipe, which is getting passed around a lot. I think the objective today for me is to share with you kind of just the basics of any chocolate chip cookie recipe. Kind of just the steps that go into it, a typical simple how-to. We will be using an adaptation of the New York Times recipe though for today, just to give credit where credit is due. But there are some basics to chocolate chip cookies that you probably are going to want to know. And once you know those, you can pretty much do any kind of baking. Baking is pretty easy if you just understand kind of the basics and the foundation of it. So join me in the kitchen today. We're going to make some yummies with some chocolate chip cookies. So in basics of baking, you do dry ingredients and you do wet ingredients. So start with your dry ingredients always. So in this chocolate chip cookie mix, we're going to mix bread flour and cake flour. And we're going to sift it. You don't always have to sift it, but this allows for air to get through, and it allows for things to be really nice and fluffy. So this is 1 cup, and we're going to add 2/3 more. 1 and 2. That's the bread flour. We're going to add the cake flour. Basically, this is 8.5 ounces, and bread flour is heavier than cake flour. So for the cake flour, for 8.5 ounces, we're going to go with 2 cups, and then out of the 2 cups, we're going to take out 2 tablespoons so that the weight is the same. Does that make sense? And we're going to put it right in our little sieve where we're going to sift. Here's 1 cup of cake flour. Now here's that other cup, and you can see I took 2 tablespoons out, and I've added that. Now before I start sifting the bread flour and the cake flour together, I'm going to add the leavening in here too. It's always good to do that. You want to sift and put together all the dry ingredients so that when it comes to adding it to the wet, it's really simple and it combines really nicely. 1 1/4, and then 1.5 of the baking powder. Now, like I mentioned, this is the New York Times. This is based on the New York Times recipe that gets shared around a lot, but even the cookie recipe on the back of the Toll House bag, you know, it's the same principles, right? You've got the flour, you've got your salt, and you've got your leavening, and you mix it all together first. So follow kind of the rule of thumb of sifting and mixing your dry ingredients and doing that first and setting it aside before you get to your wet ingredients. To this, I'm actually going to add some salt because we're going to be using unsalted butter for this recipe. And if you're using unsalted butter, then you add your own salt. And most disciplined bakers are really going to like unsalted butter because then you can control the salt content. Now, I'm going to be really honest here, guys. Sometimes I just have butter, normal salted butter, and I use that. And then I just ease up on the salt content. It's okay. No big deal. The New York Times recipe calls for 1.5 teaspoons of coarse salt, which is like kosher. There you go. So now with your dry ingredients, you do some sifting. And for you newbies out there, you know, this is just a normal wire mesh sieve, but there's also sifters out there that have a handle, and you just kind of do this, you move the handle back and forth, and it kind of allows the dry ingredients to sift through. I find that kind of time consuming, and it kind of hurts my hand after a while, so I find this to be better. And what I do is I have a little fork, make sure to kind of mix everything together. You can see the bread flour is thicker and heavier than the cake flour. What's nice about this recipe, what I find intriguing versus the Toll House, is that these two flours add some different dimensions to this cookie. The bread flour is more glutinous, giving it kind of a toothier, chewier kind of mouthfeel, and the cake flour is going to give that softer cake texture. So then you just kind of shake it. You can see here things get really fine and nice and light. Do you always have to sift? I'm going to be honest again. If I have the time, I sift. If I don't have the time, I don't sift. But what I do is I mix my dry ingredients first. That I do no matter what. You could do some tapping, you could do some shaking. Nice and sifted. Nice and light. Set this aside. So the other rule of thumb of chocolate chip baking, and pretty much all baking, is that you want some softened butter. So I set this out in the morning and let it sit, and it just naturally softened. There are some fun tips online, ways in which you can soften your butter quicker. You can try that. I just like leaving it out in the morning until I'm ready to use it. This New York Times recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of butter. My girlfriends and I in high school, we mixed, we did the Toll House recipe, but we used half butter, half Crisco, and we liked that. Whatever you do, just make sure it's nice and soft and at room temperature. You don't want it cold. Now what I like to do with the butter, is kind of just get it whipped up a little bit before I add my sugar. Sugar's always next, and you get the sugar nice and fluffy into the butter. So we're looking for a little over 1 cup of granulated sugar and 1 1/4 cups of light brown sugar. The claim to fame to chocolate chip cookies is that caramel kind of flavor, that brown sugary molassesy kind of flavor in the cookie, and the combination of brown sugar and sugar do that. So that was 1 cup of sugar, and then we're going to do 2 tablespoons. So it's just a little bit over. This is what the New York Times recipe calls for. And here's 1 cup of firmly packed brown sugar. You pack it in nice, pop it in, and we need a little bit more. We need 1/4 cup more. There you go. Now, before we go any further, you have to mix this up and get things incorporated, light and fluffy. You can see here it's all incorporated. And now we're going to add our eggs. I have 2 eggs, and when I set out the butter to get it softened at room temperature, I also set out the eggs. You want to take the chill out of your eggs, or else all this beautiful fluffy creaminess is going to start to seize up a little bit with the coolness of the egg. So those eggs incorporated nicely, and you can see things are really getting fluffy and creamy. Before we add the dry ingredients, you need to add your vanilla. This recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of vanilla, which I really like in this recipe. The Toll House recipe only calls for 1. I like vanilla. I like this creamy, smooth flavor of vanilla, so I think this is going to be great. So following our wet to wet, dry to dry, we're going to add this to the wet, 2 teaspoons. This just needs a quick mix. Okay, before I go any further, I'm going to take a spatula to this. Okay, now we can incorporate the dry ingredients. So, kind of go in two additions. And you don't want to overmix this, because if you overwork your flour, things are going to get tough. So you just want to do it so that things are just combined. So go on low. I'm going to add the second batch of dry. All right, now that you've got the flour all incorporated, it's time to add your chocolate chips. Now it's up to you. You want to do dark chocolate, you want to cut up a really good quality chocolate bar. We're looking at about 1¼ pounds of chocolate chips. I'm going to be a traditionalist because my family likes just normal semi-sweet chocolate chips. So that's what we're going to do. We know that 1 pound is 16 ounces, and 16 ounces is basically 2 cups. So we'll start there. 1/4 pound would be pretty much a 1/2 cup. So we're going to add another halvesy to the mix. Like I said, it's up to you what kind of chips you want to add, so have fun with it. You can mix in butterscotch, toffee, but this video and this recipe is a traditional chocolate chip cookie, assuming you have searched how to make a chocolate chip cookie. So this is what we're doing today. So you just kind of fold in your chips until they're evenly distributed. So there we go, it's all nice and distributed. All right, so at this point, you've got everything incorporated, and there's a couple things you can do at this point. One, you can bake them off in the oven at 350. Or you can chill this dough. There is a lot of debate, and this New York Times recipe in particular claims that if you can chill this dough for 24 to 36 hours, you're gonna have an amazing cookie. And there's some science behind this, because if you chill the dough, the butter gets really hard and solid and it melts slower in the oven. And in doing that, you have a thicker cookie, you have a crispier outside, a chewier inside, and the other thing that happens when the dough sits in the refrigerator is that the sugar gets absorbed more, so you get a more intense caramel sugar flavor in the cookie. So you have kind of a crispier, chewier cookie, a little bit of a thicker cookie, because the butter isn't melting so fast in the oven, so they don't spread as fast. If you cook it off now, you'll probably have a softer, cakier cookie, and it spreads quicker. And people are kind of split between which is better. But here's the thing with freezing it for 24 to 36 hours. I don't know about you and your family, but when my family wants chocolate chip cookies, they don't want to wait 3 days or 2 days for this. So after doing some research and doing some reading, a real simple article comes to mind. Most of the benefit of the chilling of the dough can be done in about 30 minutes. So if you want most of the benefits of chilling, but maybe not all of them, chilling the dough for 30 minutes in the refrigerator, pulling it out, letting it sit for a few minutes so that it's workable again, and then baking them from there probably is the best of both worlds. And that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna chill this for 30 minutes, and then right when I'm softening it up a little bit at room temperature to shape the cookies, I'm gonna preheat the oven at 350. So it's up to you at this point what you wanna do, but we like chewier, crispier cookies here. So that's what we're gonna do. So in the refrigerator this goes. Okay, we've chilled this for 30. I've got my oven preheating to 350, and I have baking sheets lined with parchment. My mom used to line her baking sheets with tin foil, and then you can spray a little nonstick cooking spray on them. I prefer parchment. I think it just helps to not affect the temperature, cooks evenly, and nothing sticks. Now this dough seems pretty workable for being chilled, so I don't need to let it sit too long. I'm gonna grab a tablespoon. I use just a normal tablespoon. I don't need any more gadgets, but some home chefs like to use kind of an ice cream scoop. And I'm just going to drop them like so. There we go. And I'm going to drop them about 2 to 3 inches apart. Okay, so there we are. I'm going to fill up another baking sheet and I'm going to put these in the oven at 350. And I'm going to time it for 5 minutes and then I'm going to flip the sheets and cook for another 5 to 7 minutes-ish. It'll depend, and I'll show you why. Okay, we're at 5 minutes. And this is where I like to actually flip things. And it just allows for even cooking. You can see the top is going faster than the bottom. So I kind of just rotate things around. And now they're gonna go for another 5 to 7. My alarm went for another 5, and I have to say, they're starting to get set, but they're not golden. You're looking for some golden top and golden edge. So we're gonna go for another 2 minutes. The ones at the bottom that started on top are starting to get golden, but not quite. 2 more minutes. Alarm went off again. Let's see what we have. I'm more curious about these bottoms. Yeah, they could go a little bit more. I would say another 2. They're just starting. I want a little bit more. Keep in mind that cookies continue to cook in the baking sheet, so we don't want things too brown. There we are. You don't want to keep them on the baking sheet too long because, like I said, they continue cooking. These were sort of perfect, so I didn't want to. You can see they're just lightly golden on the edge and a little bit on the top. If I were to flip this over, I don't know if they're still very hot, but you could see a nice golden color, see, on the bottom. That's what you're looking for. Those other ones got a little too brown, surprisingly, but I'll tell you, my dad would love those. He loved chocolate chip cookies, like extra crunchy, extra cooked. So we grew up eating chocolate chip cookies really brown. There you are. Chocolate chip cookies. And hopefully you got some good tips and understanding of kind of the basics. I'm gonna have a little bit of one. Yum, yum, yum. So good. Well, thank you for joining me on Fridays with Flora. And join me next Friday. And please subscribe to the channel for more fun tips, kitchen basics, and crafts. TGIF.